She didn't tell you when it changed. She didn't point to a moment. She probably couldn't even explain it herself. But something shifted, quietly, beneath everything, and you felt it weeks later wondering what went wrong. There wasn't a conversation. There wasn't a fight. There wasn't a moment where she sat across from you and said something had changed. It happened in silence. In a single, ordinary moment that you didn't even register as important. And by the time you noticed something was different, the decision had already been made. Weeks ago. Maybe months. She just hadn't told you yet. Most men, when a woman pulls away, go looking for the obvious reasons. Something they said, something they didn't say, a text that came too late, an argument that escalated. They trace back through the visible moments, the surface, searching for the exact point where things broke. But the surface is never where it broke. The surface is just where the damage finally became visible. What actually happened, the real moment, occurred somewhere much quieter, much earlier, in a place most men never think to look. And that's exactly why they miss it every single time. Here's what nobody explains to men about attraction. It isn't a feeling that builds steadily. It isn't a scale that tips slowly over time. It's a signal, constant, invisible, automatic. She isn't consciously evaluating you. She isn't sitting with a checklist running through your qualities one by one. Her system is doing something far more instinctive than that. It's scanning, continuously, beneath language, beneath logic, beneath anything she could even fully explain to herself. And that system, the one running underneath her conscious mind, it has one specific thing it's always watching for. Not what you say, not what you look like, not what you offer. How you hold yourself when the pressure is quiet. That's the first uncomfortable layer of this, and most men never reach it. Layer 1 is the test you didn't know you were taking. Early in dating, before anything is defined, before anything is official, there is a window, a short, invisible window, where she's feeling something out. Not your personality, not your humor, not your intentions, your response to uncertainty. She pulls back slightly, not dramatically, not obviously, just slightly. A slower reply, a shorter answer, a moment where she gives you less than you expected. And in that moment, without realizing it, you reveal everything. Most men, when a woman pulls away, do one of two things. They chase, they send another message, they fill the silence, they try harder, become warmer, offer more. They move toward the gap trying to close it. Or they perform, they become funnier, more interesting, more agreeable. They shape themselves around what they think she wants to feel. Both responses communicate the same thing, that her approval is required for your stability. And that, registered not as a thought but as a feeling, is the first small fracture. She doesn't decide anything yet, but something shifts, something small, almost imperceptible. That's when things begin to move beneath the surface. Layer 2 is the moment of realization. Hers, not yours. There's a specific type of interaction that creates the moment. It isn't a grand gesture that goes wrong. It isn't an obvious mistake. It isn't anything dramatic enough to explain in a story later. It's a quiet moment of need. She says something vague, something slightly testing. Not intentionally, she may not even realize she's doing it. And you reach. You reach for her validation. You reach for her reassurance. You qualify yourself without being asked. You explain your worth. You adjust your position to make sure she still approves. It lasts maybe 4 seconds. But in those 4 seconds, the system running underneath her conscious mind completes a reading. And the reading says one thing. He needs this more than I do. That imbalance, that invisible tilt in the dynamic is what creates the moment. Not a conclusion, not a final decision, but a seed, planted without ceremony, without announcement, without you even noticing it was planted at all. Layer 3 is the invisible architecture of that moment. To understand why this lands so deeply, you have to understand what she was actually looking for before the moment arrived. She wasn't looking for perfection. She wasn't looking for someone without flaws. She was looking for groundedness, the quiet, stable sense that a man exists inside himself, that he has a center of gravity that doesn't shift when she moves. This isn't confidence in the way most men perform it. It isn't loud, it isn't dominant, it isn't a posture. It's something much quieter. It's the feeling that he was something before she arrived and will remain something if she leaves. When that feeling is present, even without words, even without proof, it creates a specific psychological response in her: safety, tension, curiosity, pull. When that feeling is absent, when the center of gravity is clearly located inside her approval, the response inverts. Not disgust, not rejection, not even a conscious thought. Just the quiet, involuntary withdrawal. The system protecting itself from what it senses as instability. This is the architecture underneath the moment, and most men have never been told it exists. Layer 4 is what happens after the moment and why it's almost irreversible. This is where it gets precise. Once the system has completed that reading, once the seed of that impression has formed, everything that comes after gets filtered through it. You send the thoughtful message, she receives it, but it feels slightly different than it would have before. Not wrong, just lighter. You make her laugh. She laughs genuinely, but something underneath doesn't move the same way anymore. You do something considerate. She notices it, appreciates it even, but it doesn't restore what quietly shifted. Because attraction, real involuntary attraction, isn't rebuilt through accumulation of good moments. It's only rebuilt through a different signal, a new reading, a recalibration of the fundamental impression. And most men, because they don't know the moment happened, don't know what the reading was, keep doing more of what they were already doing. More effort, more warmth, more consistency. All of which, filtered through the existing impression, reads as confirmation. He's still reaching. He still needs this. The gap widens quietly. She becomes more distant. He becomes more present. The dynamic accelerates in the wrong direction without either of them understanding the mechanism driving it. That's the architecture of how it ends. Not with a fight, not with an explanation, with a slow, quiet fade that began in a single moment neither of them ever discussed. Layer 5 is the system beneath all of it. Pull back far enough and here's what you see. She was never evaluating your effort. She was never measuring your consistency. She was never calculating whether you were good enough based on visible qualities. She was feeling for one thing, beneath all of it, constantly, whether you needed her more than you needed yourself. That question, never spoken, never conscious, never deliberate, was being answered every time you reached, every time you filled the silence that should have stayed empty, every time you adjusted yourself to secure her approval instead of standing in your own position. The men who never triggered the moment weren't better looking, they weren't smarter, they weren't more strategic. They were simply more occupied with their own direction than with her response to it. They created a gravitational center inside themselves that didn't shift when she tested it. And that, not charm, not looks, not words, is what kept the system from completing that reading. Not because they were playing a game, because they were genuinely somewhere else, somewhere real, somewhere that existed before she arrived. And that is what the part of her beneath language was always scanning for. A man who doesn't live inside her opinion of him. By the time most men understand this, they've already lost several people they didn't need to lose. Not because they weren't enough, because they were looking at the wrong layer. They were focused on the surface, the words, the gestures, the visible effort, while something invisible was running an entirely different evaluation beneath all of it. The moment she decided wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It didn't give you a chance to respond. It happened in 4 seconds of quiet need, in a single ordinary interaction that felt like nothing. And somewhere inside her, in a place beneath words, beneath reasoning, beneath anything she could fully explain, the reading completed. The signal was clear, and the decision, quietly, without drama, was already made. You didn't notice because you were watching the surface. The surface was still fine, but underneath, in the layer where these things actually happen, something had already shifted. And that shift, invisible and wordless, is the moment that changes everything. Not what you look like, not what you offered, what you radiated. In 4 seconds, when the silence asked you who you were without her answer.